This week on the 414 Live, we're going to be looking into the emotional effectiveness of B2B marketing. There's been a real shift in recent times for B2B marketers to engage with customers on a more emotional level. But whilst there is a select group of marketers who have mastered this, there are still a lot of others who struggle. In fairness, it's quite a challenge to transform your company or brand into one which customers respond to, admire, and connect with. However, it's far from impossible. You just need to understand what's involved. And that's what we'll be covering on the show today. Hello, good morning. This is the 414 Live, back again on LinkedIn Live. The show is very much for you then if you are a professional B2B marketer or company executive with an active role in your company's sales and marketing. Because the promise is for you as a viewer, for you to expand and enhance your professional knowledge, to do what you do better and to get even better results for your company each and every week. So on today's show, we're going to be looking into what's arguably one of my favourite areas of B2B marketing, and that's the concept of making the connection between you, the marketer, and the end customer more real and authentic, and with that, engaging. And joining me today is an outright expert in the field. We've had some fantastic pre-production calls for the show. So I'd like to introduce him right now, joining us live all the way from Claygate in Surrey. There we go. Please welcome Mr. Joe Bolton.
Thank you, James. Great to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you so much for joining. I did forget there where Claygate was. I'd never heard of that before you said that's where you live. Whereabouts in Surrey is that, actually, just to enhance my geographical knowledge?
Well, so we're near Esher, which is footballers' wives' territory. It's about 25 minutes outside of London, but most of my best friends think that I live out in the sticks. But in reality, it's about 25 quid in an Uber from central London.
You know exactly where you are when you can reference it all back to how much an Uber costs to go out for a night. Right, perfect. All right. Well, hey, look, so you've actually set up recently, I'd like to just cover this briefly. You and your other managing partner have recently gone off on your own to set up your own specialist agency. Could you just give us a bit of a background on that to set the scene, please?
Yeah, love to, James. Yeah, so myself, Dave Woodward and Charlie Meredith Hardy, we worked together for about 10 years at our previous agency, Weber Shandwick. And we've been running the B2B and tech practice while we were there. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into this obviously later, but I think we saw some opportunities and some shifts in the B2B market that got us really excited and inspired us to break out and set up our own shop called Fight or Flight. So we officially launched last month, and we're already doing business with a number of really exciting B2B brands. So yeah, it's a great time to be out there, and obviously it's a challenging environment to be doing business in, but we're relishing the challenge.
Which is always good, and actually it's that fire, isn't it, that makes the difference between good marketers and ones that really go the distance. And in fact, that was very much, for me, what got me interested when we first started talking is that you're particularly fired up, aren't you, about this particular area of B2B marketing. So could you just recap what that was and what for you what you're most fired up on?
Yeah, of course. So for us, I think a big reason why we set up the agency was that we felt in our conversations with a lot of B2B and tech brands was that there is a sort of a restlessness now, a kind of positive frustration, I think, amongst a lot of B2B comms and marketing people that they want to be doing bigger, braver, bolder, more creative work, more human work, more emotional work. And I think we felt that was a real kind of energy from a lot of our discussions and a sense of desire and ambition to go a bit further in the work they do. In our old place, we spent a lot of time side by side with our consumer marketing colleagues. There was a lot of friendly rivalry between the two different business groups, and I think a lot of the time we feel as though the consumer marketers get to do all the fun cool, funky stuff, and the B2B side of the business has to kind of do all the sensible, dry, boring, logical, rational stuff. And I think for us, it was about trying to say, no, B2B can have that too. And the best B2B work manages to blend the rational messages, which of course are really important. If you're talking to a finance director or their finance organization, you need to be able to communicate the cost-saving benefits of your product or service. If you're talking to the CMO, you need to talk about how you're going to deliver leads. If you're talking to a small business owner, it's important to show them how you can save them time and help them to accelerate their progress. But there is also a huge gap in the market or a huge requirement to make them feel something. And for us, that's what that separates the standard B2B campaign from the really, really strong, high impact campaign. It's the one that actually gets the end audience to feel something, to be moved in some sort of way. That's when you're really onto something. So for us, that's an area of the discipline that we're really interested and passionate about.
And that really is the thing. So let's go down that route if we can then. So from your perspective, what's not happening properly right now in B2B marketing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, often you have this conversation with B2B marketers everywhere, and you kind of go in and say, B2B buyers, they're humans as well. The CIO that is buying a cybersecurity solution is also a mother of three, massive golf fan, or whatever it might be. And I think, for the most part, the B2B marketers that I've spent time with, super smart, super ambitious. They're like, yeah, I get it. I understand that I need to be more human in my comms. I understand that. So I actually do think the more interesting question is, why is it not happening more frequently? Why is the vast majority of comms that goes out in the category still relatively rational, relatively dry? And I think there are a lot of drivers behind that, none of which are the hunger of people working in the sector, but a lot of which I think stem back to the type of organization that a B2B company is, and some of the inherent structures and systems and behaviors that exist within B2B companies that kind of work against the marketing department in trying to do work that is maybe a bit more bold, creative, takes a little bit of calculated risk. And if you want, James, I can talk to you about what I think some of those are.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, could you give us some good examples to help illustrate that point?
I'll give you some examples. You and the audience can be the judge of whether they were good or not. But I think there's a few different strands that I often talk about and I pick up on. I think the first is you compare a consumer brand organization to or an organization primarily focused on selling to consumer and B2B brands. And one of the things that I think is true is that in a consumer company, the marketing department tends to be the rock star department. The center of gravity tends to sit with marketing, particularly if you're selling commoditized services like chocolate bars or whatever it might be. The brand, the quality of the marketing is the thing that distinguishes the product or services that you're selling, and therefore I feel the center of the gravity of the organization is much more in that favor. The budgets are bigger, but more importantly than that, the appetite of the whole organization to take risks, up the ante is greater. In B2B, what we typically find and have found in our relationships is that actually a lot of those companies, the center of gravity is more product or engineering in some cases, and in other cases, often this is the case of professional services companies, for example, its the center of gravity is the consultants or the sales guys. And quite often marketing doesn't quite have the same voice at the table, and I think that is a big reason why, when you then start getting into making creative work, if you're in an organization that's very product and engineering led, yes, it's an oversimplification to frame it like this, but take this in the spirit it's intended. There is a sense that if we get the product right and we get that product perfectly developed and we listen to the audience and we test and learn and we continue to innovate the product, we'll be successful and we'll continue to grow. And all marketing needs to do is get that product in front of as many people as we can. If it's a more sales-oriented organization, similarly, it's look, we can sell this thing. We just need marketing to get us some high quality leads that we can deliver against. I can sell this thing. Put me in a room with a customer and I'll get it sold. And I think whilst both those things are really important, I think there's an underappreciation of the craft of marketing and how marketing can really help the brand occupy, create a point of view, a differentiated point of view that can be commercially beneficial, that can help you, raise awareness and drive consideration with a much broader kind of segment of the market. And I think in those types of organisations, it is hard to make the case that to sell the product, you've got to do a bigger, more creative piece of work to capture attention first. So I think that's one thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of an example then where that's done well, do you have something you can share to help illustrate that? Or should we actually look into how you actually overcome that? In fact, let's do that first. What is the solution right here to not have that problem and where both sides are so separate?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that it's interesting to look at how that particular reality I think a lot of B2B marketers operate in. What else does that translate into in terms of challenges, and then how do you solve those individual challenges? So I think it translates into a few different things. I think it translates firstly into a sort of relatively low risk appetite for creative work. This is a bit of a cheeky comment, and I expect to get some stick from this on LinkedIn afterwards. But
go for it.
I'm gonna. What the hell? I'm gonna throw it out there. I think that a lot of us in B2B, we're tempted to make work that we know the organisation will approve and sign off on, rather than work that might raise the bar, provoke attention, earn attention. And I think that comes from constantly taking bigger concepts that get knocked down or pushed away, by senior leadership. And I think it comes from also a perception that these B2B brands are kind of more traditional, and therefore we don't take risks, right? Because we don't need to take risks in the same way. So I think there's a risk appetite issue that falls out of what I was talking about earlier. And I see risk very much as a force multiplier for communication. So if you have limited budget, but you're willing to take bigger risk, you can actually get exponential return on your investment. I think if you've got a big war chest, you don't have to take as much risk in your communications, because you can just pay to put it into the news feeds and TV shows that you want to put it in front of. But you have got to take more risk if you've got a smaller budget. But conversely, you can spend less money and get much bigger impact if you're willing to say things that are a bit provocative. If you're willing to risk that 10% of your social media audience or customer base might not fully agree with what you've said, or might pick you up on it or challenge you on it. And I think a lack of sort of risk appetite is one of the things that it manifests itself because of the center of gravity within B2B organizations. And I'll come back to that later, James, about how I think maybe that can be solved. Another thing I just wanted to pick up on, I'm sorry, I know I'm on a roll here. I will let you ask
go
in a second. But another area that I think is really interesting is on our previous calls, and I think it's a kind of cool area to get into, which is, if you're a consumer brand, your whole mindset is one of paranoia, right? It's paranoia that someone else is going to come out with a better, more impactful campaign that cuts into the zeitgeist, right? And that's that kind of it's a motivating force within the business. You've got to earn attention with your campaigns, and you've got to have everyone talking about your campaign. Otherwise, it's not been successful. And that leads to people doing bigger, better work and challenging each other. And you look at some of the big showdowns that exist in the consumer world, like your BMWs and Mercedes, your Pepsi Cokes and McDonald's, Burger King. A lot of that, they bring the best out of each other, I think, because they're always paranoid about what everybody's going to do next. The Christmas adverts, anybody that knows me knows that I take the opportunity to crowbar the fact my wife worked on the last 3 John Lewis adverts into any conversation. So the news that I've managed to do it here. You've got pretty short odds on me doing that. But I'm very proud of the work she's done there. The Christmas advert season, for consumer brands, like you can't afford to go into that thinking, oh, we just need to get something signed off. You have a whole audience or jury of the great British public that is waiting to say whether your ad was good or rubbish, and whether you're Sainsbury's or John Lewis or Marks and Spencer's or whatever. That team is, you have to go and do the absolute best, most creative, most powerful work that you possibly can. But I don't think that's the same in B2B. I think because there isn't a paranoia that someone else is going to come out with something incredible next week, and you have to make sure that you're always up in the ante. We have what I often describe as a Jean-Claude Van Damme problem, right? Which is, everybody talks about the Jean-Claude Van Damme campaign that Volvo Trucks did, where he was doing the splits across 2 trucks and to like an amazing kind of soundtrack behind him. Really, really famous piece of B2B work, but everyone still talks about it, and it was done in 2013. We're still talking about a piece of work in our category that was done 7 years ago. And I think part of that is because we're not upping the ante. We need more showdowns between B2B brands who are trying to outdo each other and out-create each other and out-innovate each other in the marketing sense. And I think if we can all take responsibility for making that happen and not running away from the scary campaigns just because they're scary, I think it will be a more fun space to work in. And I think we can start giving those consumer brands a bit of a run for their money, which is a big motivator for us.
So the thing I'm picking up here is that you're very much a fan of, in that case, shaking things up and taking risks. I can very much see how that's a problem, especially if, how did you phrase it earlier? It was... when you've got big budgets and you're I guess more established, you're perhaps less inclined to take risk and do and commission challenging work.
Yeah.
So with that, arguably smaller companies, do you think, have got the advantage in that sense because they're perhaps more likely to do that?
Yeah, I really do. I think if you're a listed business, then there's always a level of conservatism that exists around that, and that's fair enough. You've got to think about the share price and that kind of thing. But I think what's interesting about risk, and I think I've got a few thoughts on risk as an area. The first is that the biggest risk with any campaign, whether it's B2B, consumer, healthcare, whatever, the biggest risk is that no one sees it, and you put all that work in, and no one reads it. And no one engages with it, and 20 people like it on LinkedIn, and they're the 20 people that did the work in the first place. And that's not as rare a scenario as it should be. And look, I've worked on campaigns. Quite honestly, I've worked on campaigns where that's happened. In my career, and I think anybody in B2B that's watching this podcast will admit that they have too. And the reason it happens is not because we didn't work hard, it's not because we didn't try hard. It's not because we didn't do our absolute best to make a really brilliant piece of work. It's because often the initial core concept was really strong. It had a bit of risk to it. There was something a bit scary that made everyone uncomfortable, and then it got killed. It got removed. It's like, right, let's just de-risk it to the point where it's just boring and safe. And the problem is, the more you do that, the more you de-risk an idea, the less interesting you make it. Almost every single time. It's like a proportional relationship,
yeah.
And so that's one thing about risk is, if you're doing a campaign, and I say this a lot to clients, if you're doing a campaign, and some of the clients I've worked with, like, I think Epson in particular, I hope they don't mind me calling them out, but the work we've done with Epson together, fantastic company. I think what they would say is there is that moment before you put the work out, which is terrifying. Of course there is, and you think, we should have done something safer. And what if 2,000 people all hate this and start shouting at us on social media or whatever it might be? And I think that's a sign you've got a great campaign. Paradoxically, if you've got a piece of work you're really scared about, the morning before it goes out, you're like, oh god, the blood's pumping. Sorry, I shouldn't do that with my microphone on. Drive me crazy, isn't it? You have to edit that out later. Yeah. But if your blood is pumping and you're thinking, God, all these things could go wrong. Your mind's racing. You think, God, if we push the brand too hard, have we taken too much of a risk here? Is this too outrageous? Is this going to jar with our audience? Is this not our brand? You're in a good area. You've done something worth putting out. Because I've made the point already, but I'll say it again. The biggest risk with all B2B campaigns is that no one even sees them. Much better to do a piece of work that annoys 10% of your audience because it wasn't something they agreed with, than a piece of work that nobody sees. So that's a kind of a bit of a passion point for us, and I think that's why risk has got such value, and thinking about it in those terms has value. And we know that in a B2B organization in particular, communicating the value of work to your senior audience is hard. It's an easier conversation to say, oh, we want to do something. It's harder to say, we want to do something creative that breaks the mold, that takes the brand forward. It's much easier to say, we think we can get more bang for our buck if we take some creative risks here. We think we're going to spend less and get more out of it. That's a much easier commercial conversation to have.
It does sound like the key there, actually. Oh, I tell you what, Joe, could I do a quick technical thing for the benefit of live video viewers? Could you look at the camera a bit more? I know it doesn't matter for audio, but yeah, you've got to look at the camera. Right. So what I'm picking up from this, and I hope that this is kind of the right path, is that for work, campaigns and marketing in general, to actually connect emotionally with people and to get that reaction, taking risk seems to be at the heart of that. Well, first of all, have I got that right as far as you're concerned?
I think that's right. I think it's very difficult. I mean, look, I'm sure people will argue with this afterwards, but I think it's really hard to make work that people engage with and care about and talk about that doesn't have some element of risk baked into it. We're kind of hardwired to screen out content that is too safe, too predictable, too dull. So if you really want to get a reaction, start talking to people and getting people talking about you. I don't think there is. Let me put it this way: I don't think there is the campaign. Everybody wants to buy it. I feel like everyone reaches for it. It's like the safe campaign that's really cheap, that doesn't have any risk in it, but that everybody talks about and really likes and takes the brand forward. I don't think that campaign exists. I think you have to. Something has got to give in that conundrum, and risk is the cheapest and easiest thing to give, as long as it's calculated and as long as you've got a plan for what you're going to do if X, Y, Z goes wrong. But here's the thing: if you do that dissection process and you actually say, okay, this sounds scary, but let's just work through what could, if it were to go wrong, if the worst were to happen, what actually realistically would someone say? How many people would say that on social? And what would the negative product, the negative business impact be for that? And I think more often than you think, we're not talking about potentially toxic outcomes at the end of it. We're actually talking about things that A, can be mitigated, and B, if they do go wrong, actually they're not that bad.
Yes, it sounds like as well that it's the equivalent of that. What's that? The circle where you've got cheap, fast, and quality. You can choose two, but not all three. This sounds very similar. How would this work? Let's try and do this right now. How would that work in terms of campaign? So you've got risk as an element, risky. What would be the other elements that you can potentially choose from, but ultimately
I think you've got risky. I think you've got risky. I think you've got expensive. I think you've got targeted versus mass market as well. I think that's the other thing. It's the other choice that you can make. And again, I think that's where it's B2B marketers, we have an advantage, because often we can be much more specific in the audiences that we want to talk to, and we can do a lot more discovery work on them and what's going to resonate with them. Something that we're trying to do more of is messaging with specific audience groups before we actually take it out, rather than testing and learning in the moment, and that's actually quite effective as well. So, sorry, I know I'm moving away from your chart here, James, which I feel like you're going to trademark afterwards and start selling, and I want to cut the profit.
This? Go for it, yeah.
Yeah, it's targeting. Is it targeted? Is it mass market? Is it expensive? Is it cheap? Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Is it somewhere in between? All those, it's a bit like the Wonga app, isn't it? All those variables will get you to something that people will engage with, but you can't have all the dials on the left-hand side. Otherwise, you haven't got anything to work with. That's my theory.
I really like that, actually. And in fact, it really does help communicate the principle that we're here to look into. Well, tell you what, let's look into some real life case study examples. So what would you say are let's go for two of your favorite campaigns that have been executed that tick all the boxes as far as you're concerned in terms of taking a bit of risk, as well as ultimately connecting with the target customers on an emotional level. What was the campaign and why did it happen?
Yeah. I think so. I'll use two examples, and one
Mhm.
is some work we did at the previous agency, and it was with one of the ports in the UK, and the port you could get. One of their big USPs was that truck drivers could get in and out of the port in 35 minutes, and I think
Huh.
this work's really interesting because rather than just communicate the technical benefit that speed in and out of port equals more money, etc. A big part of the work we did with the client there, and I think the client deserves, well, the account team that worked on it and the client deserve a huge amount of credit for taking some risks and doing something really different and new. Was instead of putting out a bunch of functional technical messaging, they got Phil Vickery, who's a England rugby player and came fifth on Celebrity MasterChef, to come and using the ingredients that come in out of the port to come and cook a meal for 12 hungry port workers, and against the clock, right? So you've got Cliff, the lorry driver, and you've got
Right.
Phil cooking a meal for these hungry port workers. And it's sort of like a 24 clock that kind of counts down from 35. And it's really nice because Cliff is kind of showing you all the things that as a driver accelerate your route through the port. Phil is cooking, is frantically sort of cooking a chicken. I mean, to be fair, the meal does look quite grim. I hope Vickery's not watching. But he's cooking this kind of chicken pasta dinner thing. And it's a great piece of work because it dramatizes the 35 minutes. It's really engaging. You want to watch it to the end because you want to see who wins. Spoiler alert: it is Cliff in the lorry, and it's very funny and it's very humorous. And if you think about the target audience it's trying to reach, it's like a lot of them, back end analytics, or you do some audience insight work. A lot of them are into sport. So an England rugby player is a really good fit. They're used to receiving really dry, boring technical content. This is something that's just completely fresh. And I loved it because it drove business leads, number one, in terms of inbound inquiries. And it also, drove media coverage, and it drove a huge amount of engagement online on the platforms that it went on as well. So it kind of had that triple whammy. So I really thought that was a fantastic piece of work, and I've got a huge amount of admiration for for the guys that kind of put that piece of work together. And that for me is what we want to get to. We want to get to work that, why can't B2B brands use celebrities? Why can't they do that? I mean, they can, but we just don't sort of naturally go to it. We naturally go to 2,000 person study where we ask them some really sensible questions about X, Y, Z and put it into a white paper. We don't naturally go to, well, who can we partner with that's zeitgeist right now who'd be a really good kind of talent fit for us on this topic? So that's the first one I talk about. And then the second one, I think one of the things about this industry is I think you have to call out great work wherever it is, and in this case, it's a direct competitor that did Tudder, which has been talked about a lot, Tinder for Cows. But I think that piece of work's brilliant because what I love about it is you're taking a really easy, accessible consumer concept of Tinder and swiping left and right. I was never on Tinder, so I don't know which way you swipe. Unfortunately, I always get that wrong. But you take that concept and you apply it to the agriculture sector. Really nice kind of, I guess, juxtaposition of two different tones and two different contexts, and that's where a lot of great creativity comes from. Now it's won a lot of awards and will continue to win a lot of awards. And I think, again, I look at work like that and I rub my hands together and I think, if we can get more clients doing that kind of work that is funny, that actually gets you in mainstream media outlets, not just trade media, because it captures people's imagination and it gets people talking. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the people in the sector they were trying to reach that engaged with that campaign and played with the app and whatever else, it really appreciated the humor that came along with it and the fun and the contemporary look and feel of it all. And I think that's another good example of the campaign. I don't know how much that one was, but certainly in the case of the port, these are not big high budget productions. They're brands that took a little bit of risk, and you can imagine in both instances being in the room when they were cooking up the ideas and thinking, can we do it like that? And what happens if this goes wrong? What happens if that goes wrong? But they stuck it out and went for it, and certainly in the case of the port, I think there were moments in time where that could easily have knocked you off, and we stuck with it. I think that that's the work I think is the best. And this actually, let me make one final point, which is slightly off topic, but there is always this feeling, isn't there, at the end of a campaign that, oh my God, that was like perfectly choreographed, and everything that was in the PowerPoint at the start, has manifested itself in the campaign at the end. I think that's rarely the case. These campaigns are always really ugly, like making sausages behind the scenes, right? They're really ugly, difficult, gnarly to put together. There are times when you think you're going off course and you're never going to be able to get it made. There are times when you could give up. And again, that's the work I love being involved in the most. And in B2B, if you want to make really good, strong, creative work, then you have to be prepared to go through a really gnarly process to get there, because you've got more people to persuade. It's a harder journey of persuasion.
Actually, on that point, I can well imagine that, say you have got someone in marketing right now who likes the idea of doing something edgy, different, risk-taking, and everything that goes with it. They're fired up for it. But there's then, quite understandably, a process of getting buy-in from everyone else in the business to get sign-off on that. How do you get through that? And what would you recommend for someone for them to be able to get their company on board in trying something new?
Yeah, I think this is the real question, isn't it? It's a great question to ask, because if you can answer that, then I think inherent in that question is probably the biggest blocker of all. It's not about coming up with the creative ideas. There are dozens of great creative ideas that we're all coming up with in B2B, but it's how you make sure that work, A, gets approved and signed off and through, and B, doesn't get watered down and turned into something boring in the process. It's like the whole sort of camel is a horse made by committee example, which is absolutely the case with a lot of this work.
I like that example.
If there's one thing I would say, there's a lot of good things about a lot of talents B2B marketers have, but in my experience, they don't need any help from agencies to manage their stakeholders. They know their stakeholders really well. They understand what they need, and they are absolute past masters at getting things approved and understanding which levers of power to pull. And I think for me to sit here as a agency lifer and try and lecture people on how to manage stakeholders in a business would be very foolish. What I would say is, I think it's incumbent on agencies, though, and I think this is where agencies like us, need to step up as well, because I think too often we'll go into a pitch and say, right, say we're bringing some new creative concepts, and we do one really good meeting with a really fancy deck, and the meeting goes really well, and it's with the client and their boss, and it looks fantastic, and everyone buys into the creative, and we're kind of guilty of coming away beating our chest, going for a glass of champagne in a pub somewhere before COVID, now having a glass on a Zoom call, and patting ourselves on the back and going, "Oh, job done! I can't wait to make that piece of creative work." I mean, that's like Tyson Fury, coming back to his corner after the first round and saying, "Brilliant! Like, give me the belt, please." It's a long, in B2B. It is a much. There are more rounds, and they are more brutal rounds, because as I mentioned right at the top of the conversation, the center of gravity is not in favor of marketing in the same way as it is in consumer organizations. And so you're going to have to persuade a ton of people from different business groups, from different geographies, from different discipline areas, of different levels of seniority, in quite a short window of time to go with this campaign. So that lovely fancy first slide deck, it ain't worth the paper that it's written on, unless you're willing to tool up and get into the ring with the client. I'm mixing metaphors there. You're willing to get a pair of gloves on, get in the ring with the client, and go the 12 rounds it takes to get the work made. And crucially, not to accept compromises. I think we're all kind of hardwired to compromise, particularly agency people. Actually, we absolutely love compromising. It's kind of what we've been brought up to do. And I think, particularly actually in our discipline, which is more communications versus above line advertising, we're a lot more meek in how we receive kind of critical feedback on ideas. And I think being entirely unwilling to compromise on ideas is absolutely fine, because often if you remove one element, as we said earlier, usually the scariest bit, the
Yeah.
whole campaign becomes extremely difficult to roll out. It doesn't have the impact that you promised, and you wind up letting people down. So that would be my thing: is agencies have to be prepared to go all in on their ideas. To use a poker analogy, they've got to be prepared to go all in. We've had conversations with clients previously. I will not name them because they'd send me on a hot hate mail if I did. But I've had conversations with clients too, where I said to them, they could fire us if the campaign didn't work. And I told them to go back into the business and let everybody know that the agency's happy to be fired if they're wrong. And I tell people that story, and they're like, "Wow, but what if it had gone wrong?" And it's like, that's not the point. The point is, like, if you don't believe in your idea enough to go all in and put your entire budget and agents and client relationship on the line, why should the client expect it? Why should the client, who you're asking to put their head above the parapet, who you're asking to advocate for something that maybe they've never done before, or if they've done it at a previous organization, maybe their boss or people within the organization haven't done it before. Why should you ask your client to do that without being willing to do the same thing? And I think we can sit and complain about creative work gets killed, internally, fine, but we need to be in there. We need to show up. We need to be ready to defend it, and we need to be ready to put everything on the line to keep it alive.
And I think that's a fair comment as well. And you know what? I respect that. I think that's nice. Well, hey, look, we've actually gone a bit over time, so I suppose I should wind things up a bit, but not before asking you could you summarise everything that we've covered in this as being, what would the main takeaway be that you'd like for the audience to have in doing these kind of campaigns, and being successful in the end goal of connecting with customers in a more emotional context?
Yeah, so I think, to summarize, I think this is it's not you, right? It's not you. If you're an agency person or an in-house person in marketing and comms, the fact is, like, accept it or don't accept it, you are working against some constraints that people in other categories are not working against. And so, the number of hurdles you have to overcome to get to par with a big fancy consumer brand is there's lots more of them. And so you can either say, okay, it's too hard, I'm going to make the best work I can within constraints, or you can try. And I'm not talking about every campaign. I'm talking about maybe campaigns that you're going to go for something that's scary, something that puts you out of your comfort zone, something that has some risk baked into it, something that's really new and fresh, and that you're not going to, and your boss and senior leadership are not going to water down. You're going to give it a try. And you can start small, and you can start with a tailored audience. And I think LinkedIn, by the way, is an amazing place to do this experimentation. LinkedIn's really friendly medium. Hopefully, I haven't seen the comments on this interview, so I could be proven wrong. But yeah, LinkedIn's a really friendly place where there's a level of professionalism and respect for what people are trying to do and what people are saying. But it's also very boring. Most of the content is really dull. So if you put something out there that's a bit fun, a bit provocative, a bit engaging, it's got a bit of magic in it, LinkedIn's a great place to just taste it initially, put a little bit of paid behind it, not a lot, a couple of grand, see what the response is, and then take that proof of concept in and talk about whether you want to go further, whether it worked, whether it didn't, did it manifest itself as you thought it would. So I think LinkedIn's a great playground to do that in. But coming back to my summary, I think that risk is good. If you think that something's got risk in it, it's to be run towards, not run away from, and that goes for agencies as well as clients. I think it's about trying to challenge the organisation to think about, well, what if our competitors were Burger King or Samsung or Apple, and they were coming up with these incredible campaigns? What would we do? What would we do then? I think it's about trying to unpack what everybody's afraid of a little bit and say, okay, well, we're this type of organisation, but why do we have to be this organisation? And too often the phrase, "Oh, that's not in line with our brand," is used as a bit of an excuse for what we really mean there is, we've not done something like that before, which is different. It's not the same as that's not what we're all about. It's different. So I think having an open mind, it's incumbent on everyone but this is not easy, right? And I think if you're sitting in pubs and, sorry, again, that's a very outdated phrase. If you're sitting on teleconferences with friends and family, drinking margaritas and throwing around, B2B should be more human, it should be more emotional. B2B buyers are people too. Yeah, we all know that. The question is, what next? How do we overcome the very real barriers that exist for all of us in doing great work? And we've all got to pull together. We've got to celebrate the successes wherever they come from when they do happen. We've got to try and hold ourselves accountable for doing more and going bigger and better. And agencies like us have got to not be afraid to get in. A 10-slide deck didn't sell anything, right? It didn't sell anything in B2B. You've got to get into a ring and work hard and put your body on the line to get this stuff made. And I think if we start doing that, this is already a fun category to work in, but imagine how fun it would be if we were starting to do work that was really getting people talking.
That, I think, is a noble and actually quite cool thing to aim for, all told.
Thanks, James.
Well, Joe Bolton, managing partner of Fight or Flight, thank you ever so much for joining me today. It's been really good. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having us, James. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And if you've enjoyed watching this morning, then please do make sure that you are subscribed. Here we go, web address on screen, the414.net for all subscription options and to check out previous episodes in full. There we go. Well, there we go then. My name's James Rostance. This has been wonderful being back on the air again, and we will be here same time again next week for more insights and wisdom from some of the greatest and most interesting minds in B2B marketing.